All right, here we go. Now we got it here. Let me get the actual thing set up. Sorry if you guys were looking at my other thing before. I don't think there was probably very many people that did that, but we are now live and you should be able to see my screen. We're talking about strength training specifically when it comes to program design for peak performance. I'm going to keep on getting better with doing these lives. I do think it's a good time to be able to do this and connect with you guys. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, let me know. I do have chat up on my end and we'll get right into it. So, big thing that we want to be able to, I think, go in depth into when it comes to the strength training is setting up a plan, setting up some type of organization of saying, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on within a given time period, whether that be a 6 month time, 12 month, whatever the case may be. I do work with a good amount of different teams and different people to be able to help them being able to understand how to improve your or how to get specific into your improvement when it comes to strength training, strength improvement. And I think it's important to say and differentiate between what are we trying to actually accomplish in our program design. So first, we want to be able to improve the range of motion. I think that's important. The next thing is going to be develop more movement capabilities. And this is really when it comes down to helping you maximize your ability to improve the like range of motion in the squat and your shoulder press and just being able to get the most out of any particular lift. And then we also want to be more resistant to injury. So at the end of a macro cycle, like a 12-week macro cycle, I want to be able to look back and say, okay, did I do all these things well? Was I able to improve my range of motion or improve the athlete's range of motion? Were we able to develop more movement capability and really gets a lot into strength? And how well were we able to stay healthy? First one going into the improved range of motion. I think that what's good with this is let's define what strength is. What is strength? It's the ability to control the body through a wide range of movements and really getting specific into the things like a full range of a squat, being able to do deadlifts, being able to control a deadlift, and also being able to get good with acceleration and deceleration and understanding what that means for a particular athlete is important for being able to develop strength. I don't think it helps you to just have one part of your strength, which would just be like acceleration. I do think being able to decelerate is important. And the only way to have a team or have a group that can effectively decelerate is to program that into your ability to your program, right? You got to be specific in what is the deceleration portion of the program, whether that be a mesocycle, whether that be a microcycle, and we get more in depth into that when we talk more about periodization. But I do think it's important to understand and differentiate between the acceleration and the deceleration. The last part is just the health. We want to be able to say, you don't look at somebody that's saying that's weak or that's hurt or that's injured and say that's a form of strength. Typically, somebody that is not healthy or is injured is not strong. So we want to be healthy in our program, but that's a big goal of the program. And then what does strength not represent to me? It's just limited control of loaded movement. So it's not being able to get as much range of motion, right? Having to cheat the range of motion a little bit. That to me is or does not represent strength, as well as people that are injured. People that are injured are just not a great representation, in my opinion, of somebody that is very strong in their ability to just show athletic performance. Now, another big part of this is going to be develop more movement capability. So this is variability in the different types of lifts that you're doing. You're not only doing a squat, you're not only doing a traditional bench press, you're not only doing a hang clean or hang snatch, just adding in different variations of the types of exercises. And I'll get a little bit more in depth into the different types of exercises there. But then we do want to be able to have some power producing movements. So what are the movements that you're doing that you need to use the whole body in order to accomplish? And what are some of the movements that we're doing where it's much more isolated or much more specific in what it is that we need to be able to accomplish, right? So a tricep specific exercise or an anterior tibialis specific exercise. Sometimes it's important to be able to get more specific into those types of movements or those types of muscle groups to make it so then we can get a specific type of improvement. Now, this is going to be an example workout. What we'll see here is what I typically break the workouts into is three kind of main core lifts, three, maybe four main core lifts. And then we'll have for each lift about three supplemental types of lifts that you're going to be doing as well. So we just want to be able to say I'm just big on like everybody should be working, right? So a lot of times this will be when I'm working with 60, 70 different athletes, you have 12 racks. And so you just don't have a ton of space for everybody to be working out. In an ideal situation, I'd have maybe two to three people to a rack. A lot of times in this situation, I'm working with closer to four people to a rack. And again, we want to be able to have the guys working the whole time. And so when you have the other supplemental type exercises, that gives us a good opportunity to be able to work on a variety of different things. So first thing is going to be like the rear foot elevated split squat. I'm big on single leg. I'm big on balance. I'm big on being able to control through an active range. And so I would much more, and this is with a barbell as well. So I would much more rather see a heavy lunge, heavy rear foot elevated split squat in comparison to a heavy barbell traditional squat. And then we also have a goblet hold side lunge. Also do overhead side lunge, just good for the groin, good for the hips, keep the range of motion there. Kettlebell dorsiflexion, but just put the kettlebell at the end of the foot, coming all the way up and down. Leg lifts, working the hip flexors. Then we'll go into deadlift, go single leg hip extension. I'm big on strength as well as power. So we want to be able to emphasize the muscles that are being targeted within like the deadlift. So that's where that single leg hip extension comes into play. So that's going to put a little bit more focus on the upper glute and the upper hamstring glute muscle, and then max height jump. So now we're strengthening the muscle group, hip extension, and then we're also putting that into a power production movement with the blocks jump, excuse me. And then we'll also be working on the horizontal calf raise. I just like to put in different variations of the calf raises, not only one particular direction with the foot. So I'll work three different directions. I also will have bent knee, straight leg. I just think that being able to work the calf in a variety of different ways is great. And then we also have like a landmine adductor shift. So again, this is just a range of motion type of exercise. Lately, I've been doing more field work with athletes and with the teams because I just think that doing too much weight stuff is just not necessarily like a big thing that people need. So I think it's important to be able to say, you know, especially at this time, like working with football players, I think it's important to get on the field. We'll do starts, we'll do 5-10-5s, we'll do L drills, we'll do different variations of like bungee type sprinting or resistance type sprinting. The bungees will be for assisted sprinting, so you're going to be working more at top speed. Things like that, I think, are great to help in being able to improve your team's ability to have more athleticism in general. A lot of times, strength. I mean, if you work a lot on sprinting, to me, you're going to get a lot stronger. And then also, I put a big emphasis on the core. If you've trained with me in the past, and you know I'm a big core focused type of person, and so that is going to be a big part of it as well. So. Next part, be more resistant to injury. So, like I just said, big emphasis on core. I do think that we also want to be able to talk about rest and recovery. So, what are we eating? What are we doing outside of the training sessions? I'm always talking to the players about their protein, what they should be eating, what are good meals to be eating. And trying to give more insight into that if they have any recommendations when it comes to protein powders, or a lot of times within the age group 16, 17, I'll tell them to start taking creatine, if they really want to get bigger. I think that that's a great supplement. I use creatine as well, so I'm not doing it and not or not recommending it without doing it. And then I'm big on high intensity, right? Like, let's really challenge ourselves here. Let's push ourselves. So if we put the right type of emphasis on the rest and recovery, as well as even stretching at the end of the workout, now we can really get after when it comes to the intensity of the workouts, which I think is important because when you're going and you're playing, whether it's football, whether it's baseball, soccer, basketball, the intensity of the game is going to be a lot. And so if you're not properly prepared for the intensity, then that's when injuries happen. And so I like to be able to really push the athletes and see how they respond in situations where there's a lot of intensity, because if you have the natural response to that high intensity to start to get yourself into bad movement positions. I want to be able to see that. I want to be able to correct it, whether it's on an individual basis or within the entirety of the team. There's a lot of times at the end of the sessions, I'll take a little bit of time and just be, talk a little bit about the overall effort of the team, what I'm seeing, what I'm not seeing, what we should be seeing in terms of leadership, in terms of effort, in terms of the guys that are pushing themselves, not pushing themselves, things like that. I think it's great to be able to have both an individual relationship with the athletes as well as a uh, large group type of relationship. So talk to all of them as a whole unit, as well as them both or as well as individually as well. I think a lot of coaches make the mistake of not having maybe as much of an individual relationship with a lot of guys. Or if there is an individual relationship, it's a lot of times very negative, or it's only the best guys that have a uh, more intimate relationship, I guess, or a closer relationship. And these are all, to me, things that are not very effective when it comes to trying to build a whole team that's really going to work hard every day. I want to be able to see as many guys really pushing themselves as possible. And the best way to be able to do that is to make them feel like an individual, like a person, the best that I can. There's a lot of different people that I'm training. And so I'm not perfect at this by any means, but it's definitely something that I work on to be able to, when I need to, get the most out of an individual or the entire unit of the team. And so we're talking a lot about that, the intensity of the workout, and sometimes there are certain punishments and there's certain repercussions based off of what's going on or what's not happening within the workout. And I think that that is a good way to build the leadership within the team. And I'm not perfect at this. I'm not going to try to make it seem like I have all the answers, but I do think that testing this and having some degree of a understanding of what are some of the differences can help you out. Big thing with periodization, this is for a team, right? I know that some of you guys are watching this based on just looking for individual, how can I get more periodization? And we're going to get more into what will help you there from this point on. It'll be a little bit more periodization focused, or individual focused, I guess. Well, with the periodization, big thing I would just say is have a plan, right? So let's go at it with saying whatever it is, 8 months, 12 months, 6 months, just having some degree of a periodization plan. And there are different types, and I'll come back to this. There are three different types of periodization. We have linear, which is just going to be a gradual increase. We're going to have an undulating, which is going to be more frequent variations of intensity and volume, even by the particular week. So there'll be one day where you're going to be having a lot higher amount of reps, and then within that same week, you'll go into a lower amount of reps where like the last one, the block, or organizing training into different distinct blocks will make it so at different times of the year, you're going to be having higher amounts of reps. And then other times of the year, you're going to be having lower amounts of reps, where linear, you're going to just be consistently increasing the intensity. I usually use block training in what I do with the overall year, and how I kind of program it. I don't love how this slide looks here, but yeah, so basically looking at the entire year as a macro cycle and breaking it up into different mesocycles or microcycles. And the mesocycle is about every 4 weeks, and then the microcycle is every around a week. And so if you're an athlete and you're looking to be able to have some degree of a specific training that you're doing, then this is going to be for more like a football team. So we could see starting off in February. Now, a lot of times we'll start closer to January, but you're going to go through February, and typically the beginning of February is when we all have like our first max. And so at the beginning, it's much more technique focused, much more focused on like the amount of reps that you're doing, and not as much on the intensity of the individual rep. And then as you get after that first max, then we'll start to get into, and you can kind of see you could have different percentages. You could even do different type of weeks based off of what it is that you're going to be kind of focusing on, I guess, within or when you want to have your peak performance is going to be typically more towards the end here. So July, August time period is going to be for a uh, team that is a um, like a football team is going to be like late July, early August is when you're going to be when you want to be at your max. And we'll get a little bit more in depth into like in season type of workouts in comparison to off season type of workouts and how to make that variation. But again, I think it's important to have a plan. So typically, what we'll do is go like 4 to 5 weeks, and then we'll test, and then we'll go into and based off of that, we'll start to lower down the intensity, or sorry, lower down the amount of reps and really start maximizing the intensity, and then have another test in like March time period. So go for about 6 weeks, and then we just had another one here a couple weeks ago, right before spring break, which was and I can show you a little bit more about what are some of the things that we test. So we'll test the how much they weigh, we'll test incline, pull-ups, squats, snatch, bench, clean, as well as the 40. Sometimes we'll even go more into top speed. This is again for football team. For baseball, I'd test the 60. For some of the athletes, again, I'll just test what is their top speed. And so then we can see all of those types of things. And obviously want to be able to progress in all those areas. And the reason why I like to choose those particular lifts are just because of the wide variety of different types of coordination that is responsible for it. So, you got to have good coordination for the snatch. You got to have good coordination within for your hips, for the cleans. And then I also like bench press and snatch and sorry, full squats. I know some people are not as big of fans of some of those types of movements, but I think that that's a good test of just general strength. We want to be able to see speed. I'm also big on like pull-ups. How many pull-ups can you do? I think that's a great way to be able to, great indication of the health of the individual is how many pull-ups they're able to do. I don't test on deadlift. I don't test on the like push press or shoulder press. I've tested in those in the past. I don't have great success with those. I'm not a huge fan of front squats either, especially for testing. I've had a little bit more issues with like lower back issues. Um, a lot of times I just think that there's times where you could just be a little bit more um, specific to staying healthy, right? Like I want to have a good balance of what are some of the main maxes that we want to be able to see and how can we establish proper health. And a lot of times based off of what we're seeing, we'll go and change the planning accordingly. So for an individual, because again, I know we want to talk a little bit more about that, then I think what's the first thing that you want to think about is, and this is for structuring out your whole macro cycle, is what is your preseason? What is your off season? What is the postseason? What is the in season? What a time of the year is that? So now to translate to track, I know there's probably a lot of track people that are watching this right now is really the in season portion of your training. And so you should have for the past like 6 weeks already, you've been in season. So you're towards the end of your in season right now and really should be at your peak level of performance. And so you're, preseason would be more in like the January, February time period. I know it's a little bit different for everybody. Your postseason is going to be, right around here. I mean, May, now we're getting into like the essentially like the finals, the state finals, all that type of stuff. So May, June is going to be really that postseason type period. And then the off season is going to be in the summer and winter months. So, that's really when you want to be training. You have a long time of training from like July through December, I would say. I mean, some of you guys might be competing in the indoor as well. And I know there's a whole indoor season, and that would be a different macro cycle. That would be a whole nother season. And so you'd want to have that as a way of maybe being able to test certain numbers. But if you really want to peak in this season, then you want to plan accordingly. And if you wanted to really peak more in maybe the indoor, then you'd want to plan accordingly for that as well. A lot of times for track, I'll break things up into like 6 to 8 week different increments there. And then based off of your technique of the movements, I think that's also an important thing to be able to distinguish how are we going to plan and structure it. So are the movements performed at a high level or at a adequate level at least? And if we're not able to do the movements well, then we don't want to end up going into high levels of strength training yet or high intensity yet. And what I mean by high intensity is just we really start to lower down with the amount of reps. We want to be able to stay in a little bit higher reps if the intensity, or sorry, if the technique is not there. And then the last thing is going to be where are we at from a number perspective? What do we need to see improve? And I know that this is going to be very different between track in comparison to football, in comparison to baseball, and the different types of lifts that we're going to be choosing. But based off of your numbers, I think that's also going to go into your structure and how you want to be able to plan out your workouts accordingly. And again, with track, I know some of it's going to be very field focused, very plyometric focused, and some of the times you're going to need to put more of a programming focus on what am I doing on the track to be able to maximize my top speed. And make that more of like the focus of the workout, where there's going to be other times where it's a little bit more endurance. So that to me would be more in that earlier time period in your training. So if like the off season, earlier off season is going to be when you're running those longer endurance type of runs. Maybe if you run the 100, you'll be running more 400, 600 type of runs. Where as you get closer, then you're going to be running much more 60s, 30-meter flies, 50-meter flies, things like that. Maybe even 10-meter flies. They're putting a big focus on plyometrics. And that's what most people should be at right now, is where it's much more block start focus, 0 to 30, 30 to 50, and really being able to see where we're at. Let's run into the curve and let's see, what are we doing within the curve, and getting very specific in the technique and getting plenty of rest in between the sets, or in between the repetitions, to make it so then we can really optimize the performance. We shouldn't be super tired going into these um, events or into these meets at this point of the season. So it gives you a little understanding of some basics when it comes to that. This is going to be, again, a comparison of the intensity of like the off season. It's going to be much stronger, going to be having more complex type lifts, going to be doing typically one part of the body. The first time, the other one I showed was more of a lower body. This one's going to be more upper body. We'll be doing like 5 sets of bench press, right? That's just not something you're going to be doing when you're going to be doing more in season. Even these with the rear foot elevated, again, more dumbbell, more stuff that's just not as heavy, work in the range, single leg calf raise, overhead side lunge. So all these things, single leg RDL to press. So these all require you to have lower amounts of weight. We'll also be doing more upper body and lower body all in one movement, still doing core. Whether it's the off season, whether it's the in season, we're still putting a big emphasis on being able to develop the core. I think that's going to be important no matter what in the development of the athletes. And then, to me, we'll kind of finish it off there. Just some key takeaways from the whole presentation. Really, I think it's important to say, what are we going to achieve? What are the goals of the next 8 months or 12 months? How often are we going to be able to work out? How many days do we want to be able to get on the track? How many days do we want to be able to get in the weight room? How many days do we want to get on the field if you're a football player? And even if you're a coach, how are we going to separate this? How are we going to do this when it comes to spring ball? When are we going to start practice? What are some of the off days, off weeks, vacation times? How is that all going to be in play when it comes to setting up the program? And then, get a feel for it, test it out. And it's constantly changing in how you're going to be able to develop it. This is, I've been doing this for 7, 8 years at this point, and every single year it's different. There's always different parts of it that you want to be able to adapt, you want to change, you want to say, try out different things, experiment different ways, and just enjoy the process. I think that ends up being an important part of this thing. Same thing with doing the YouTube channel. It's like just enjoying the process, continuing to learn, continuing to understand, and same thing even going live. I haven't done very many of these live sessions, these presentations even creating these presentations is a whole new step in a new direction for me. So yeah, I would say just go about starting off with just trying it, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, learn and respond accordingly. I appreciate everybody that showed up for this. Sorry if I wasn't too engaging within the chat. I was doing most of my stuff with the explanation of the presentation. But I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it ends up being beneficial for you. If it did, like and subscribe, share with any of your friends.